Hello, and welcome, of course, to the big show. We do the big show every single day, and of course, we always have a good time with it. And so it is one of those things where today we're going to talk about a lot of different things. We've got a lot of different subjects to get into today. Obviously, we'll talk about we'll talk about the Steelers. We'll talk about what they're going to try and do. We're going to take a look at maybe the AFC North teams, and we were going to try and figure out what it is that the Steelers have done and where it puts them in the pecking order of the AFC North. I will say it's interesting because we are now in a place where everybody is sort of slowing down a little bit at a time, and I think that that is what happens in free agency, and I think that what I mean by that is in free agency the first week is always crazy. There's some trades. There's always some different things that are going on, and at the end of the day, it's important to note that when we really sit here and take a look at it from the standpoint of trying to judge the offseason, it is going to always be a situation where you look at it from the outside and say you cannot really understand or judge it until the end of the offseason because so many different things have to happen. So I feel like it's important to note that, whether or not the Steelers are where you want them to be right now doesn't really matter. What matters is what are you going to do in coming up. It's just going to be always important to note that we are basically here trying to judge something that's incomplete. And I think that really when you look at it from the standpoint of what's incomplete, I would tell you that I think that all of the teams are probably not done yet. They probably haven't figured out what they want to do or how they're going to do it with a couple of key positions. But for the most part, I think it's important to note that you are looking at really what's going on with all of these teams, and it's probably very, very similar to what the Steelers have done. I mean, if you look at what the Ravens have done, they've lost a couple of key players. Their big signings seem to be DeAndre Hopkins. It's one of those things. They've gotten a couple special teams guys. They got a couple of guys on, to help. They retained one of the most important tackles. They signed a backup quarterback, but for the most part, if you think about it, what they've done is really not that much different than what the Steelers have done. They've lost a couple of key players. They've lost maybe, a little bit. But the reality of it is basically that it's important really to understand and note that what they've done is basically fortify some of the guys that they already had. They went out and they basically said, we're going to get some guys to fill in some of the spots where we lost players like linebacker. They got Jake Hummel. And then they also went out and got, signed a couple of their guys that they needed for their offensive line, obviously, because that was a big concern is that they're going to lose some of their offensive linemen. Even though they did lose one of their offensive linemen, for the most part, they were able to keep their offensive line together. And, of course, they got DeAndre Hopkins, a big playmaker. Is that really that much different than what the Steelers have done? Probably not. Probably not. And so, now it's a matter of, well, it's going to be here where we basically sit here and say it's got to be, the Steelers' time to try and get it done. And I think that's what it comes down to from really the standpoint of everything that is happening when it comes to the Steelers. They are basically not that much different than the teams in the AFC North. I looked at all the teams and the offseason moves that they've made, and basically, I got to be honest with you, I just don't think it's that significantly different, honestly, at all. And the Browns are looking for a quarterback. I mean, I know they got Kenny Pickett, but they're still looking for a quarterback, and there's still a chance that they're going to end up with Russell Wilson even. But if you look at what else they've done, they've basically, fortified their offensive line a little bit, brought in a couple linebackers, kept a couple of their own linebackers, and brought in a reasonably decent receiver. It really comes down to the quarterback with them. With the Ravens, it's just a matter of what they do in the draft and can they fortify some of the positions they need to fortify before we can determine what they're doing. And now the Bengals have problems. And I'll tell you what the Bengals' problem is. The Bengals' problem is that it's going to be now a situation of where you look at it from this standpoint. They've spent so much money on 3 players, which they're supposed to, by the way. They're supposed to. They're supposed to spend that much money on players. And I think that really, if you think about it, when they, those 3 guys, give them a chance, but the offensive line's got to get much better, and I don't know that it has. And I think the other thing is, the defense has to get much better. And I don't know how you'd make that happen either. It's just going to be interesting to see how it all works out and how it all comes together. Because that's the biggest, in my mind, the biggest question that you have. It's just really going to be important to note that we are sitting here talking about teams that aren't necessarily really going to be complete in what they're doing until really deep into the season. That's what it's going to be from the standpoint of they need to really, really, really finish out what they're doing before we start to decide whether or not this team or that team has done better than the Steelers or the Steelers that haven't done as good as anybody else. So we'll see right now where that happens or what that looks like. But to me, I think that the Steelers really have to basically figure out their quarterback spot before anything else can happen. And I think that that's what is probably next on their plate. I mean, I think everything else is almost going to be in a little bit of a holding pattern until we figure out what happens with Aaron Rodgers. And so in my mind, when you look at it that way, it's going to be very, very interesting to see if they're able to overcome this kind of stuff. And if they are, I think it's going to be important really to note that if they don't do what they need to do to add a quarterback, it could be a long, long, long sort of a season for them. There are some people that are afraid to death of a bad season. I'm not, for their sake, because I feel like if you have a bad season, then you have a chance to draft a quarterback. And that's what you want anyway. So, it was a bad season that brought Ben Roethlisberger here. It's a bad season that brings, really top quarterbacks to the places they've been. And I think that's really one of 2 things can happen. You can, sit here and basically, be worried about the fact that they don't have, a quarterback or they don't have what, you think they need. But really, if you look at the AFC North, your contemporaries, that's basically where we're at. Those are the people you're competing with. Those are the people that you need to know. That, hey, this is where we're competing and this is what we're doing. And these are the teams we're competing against. So, to me, at the end of the day, it's going to be very interesting to see what it all looks like when we get, deeper into the off season. But I would caution you to say that, you need to watch and make sure if you're really going to look at it, you just got to watch that you're judging it too quickly because there's still a lot that needs to happen. On the note of the Pitt Panthers, by the way, what I would call the silly season of college basketball has begun, and that is, of course, the season where we have what's called all of the people leaving and transferring and every all the other crap that goes on. And of course, we are now at a place where Amzell Diliak, the Graham brothers, they're gone. So basically 3 more Pitt guys. And here's the thing, there's a lot of people that want so badly, they want so badly to, make it out like, well, this must be a Pitt problem or a culture problem or whatever. It's not. It's just the way things are. And my guess is the Graham twins were probably told to get on with their life's work. I don't know that this is probably their doing, if that makes sense. I just think that probably, Jeff Capel needs to get better and needs better players. So, to me, when you look at it that way, he needs better players. He's got to free up scholarships. There's 4 guys now that are in the portal for Pitt. That number is going to probably grow to about 6 or 7 or even 8, just like every other school. It's just ridiculous. It's the life that we live right now. And now you've got to go get money. And now now you've got to figure out if you've got enough money to go spend it on going to get players. And if you do, you know what? Then all of a sudden, you bring in a better crop of people and you hope that you can coach them up next year. But the offseason for Pitt just got started. I call it the silly season because that's what it is. And yesterday I talked a little bit about Robert Morris losing their 2 best players. These mid-majors, all they are is basically just farm systems now. That's all they are. And it's going to get worse. So anyway, let's bring in our good friend from Pennsylvania Sports Network, Joe Lednowski. Joe covers a lot of variety of sports. He talks about a variety of sports on his talk show that's in Northwest PA and also in Central PA. And Joe, I was just talking about Pitt and the silly season, which has begun. And the Graham twins are gone. Diliak is gone. And was it Marvin? I think it was Marvin Barnes is gone. Marlon Barnes is gone. And so now you've got 4 guys from Pitt. Yesterday, there was 912, I think was the number, guys entered the transfer portal. I have to imagine that number is up close to 1,500 by today. There's no end in sight in this, right? This is just sort of the reality of the way sports are going to be done now for the rest of our lives.
Well, I think the only thing that will fix it will be a natural correction, and that natural correction would be the money drying up. There's a lot of money that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And, I think, and not to pick on the guy, but, the one that was sort of like the first superstar to do it was Hunter Dickinson, right? When he left Michigan to go to Kansas. That was not money well spent. The transfer portal is ultimately what cost Jimbo Fisher his job because they spent all that money 2 recruiting classes ago, and not a single one of them survived the season. The natural market correction will be when the next time the coach goes to the money well and the money well has run dry because it just does not make sense. You're hearing numbers of kids to go to schools that, $30,000 to get a kid to go to a school that they may not play in front of 30,000 fans at home for the entire season. Like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, it just doesn't make sense. And then there's going to be the pay for play that's coming along the way, the next wave. And I know eventually we're going to get to St. Francis, but they're all tied into one. And, St. Francis, in my opinion, was the first domino of many to fall. We've talked about this with the Olympic sports, but I think when you have a team that's going to go from the NCAA tournament to playing at Allegheny and Meadville on a Wednesday night, all within 500 days, that's a hard pill to swallow.
No, it absolutely is. I mean, but again, I think we're going to see that more and more, just because of the astronomical money that it's going to take to continue to compete. I mean, really, realistically, St. Francis is one thing, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. I'll tell you something that's more troubling, and that is Robert Morris. Okay, because Robert Morris, unlike St. Francis, St. Francis made no bones about the fact that really they didn't have an NIL. They didn't have, money like that. They weren't really paying their players. I made a joke in my column, which I put up for the Post-Gazette, where I said, hey, maybe Nick's Quick Pizza in Evansburg will give you $50, to play at St. Francis. But that's the extent of the NIL that's there. But I'm going to tell you, Robert Morris went out last year and raised, Chris King, the athletic director there, raised a really decent number when it comes to, the NIL collective. And they were able to go purchase a couple of players, for lack of a better word, that obviously led to, the run that they had. And they were able to pay them. I think the number that they were able to raise total was like about $110,000, which means they were probably able to give these guys 30, 35 grand or whatever, right? All the three of their top players are already in the transfer portal. The guys that were making the money, do you want to know why? Because they can make a heck of a lot more somewhere else now, because they used basically Robert Morris as their platform. They played really well throughout the season. They got, on TV a lot late in the season because they were good. And then they, in the Horizon League, tournament. And then, of course, against Alabama, you know what? All these guys leave now. That, to me, is in some ways more troubling than St. Francis, because my feelings about the St. Francis's of the world, you should be playing Division III. And I know that's going to make people really angry when they hear me say that. There's a number of schools that should not be playing Division I athletics. They just shouldn't. They can't really afford it, and it doesn't make any sense, and for all the talk about the history and the tradition and all the other stuff about St. Francis basketball, the reality is this was the second time the men's team's been in the NCAA tournament. So it's not like they, have been some sort of, world beater of it. And a lot of it comes down to finances. So to me, would you agree, though, that a school like Robert Morris that's actually trying to compete and trying to raise money for NIL, that's a more troubling sign than, a school like St. Francis is basically saying, we can't afford to do this anymore.
Well, Chris King has done a spectacular job at Robert Morris, and, Andy Toole, I tweeted earlier that I joked maybe Andy Toole should have hit the transfer portal as well to see what he could fetch on the open market. But, and this is not anything negative directed to Bobby Moe in any way, shape, or form. But Bobby Moe is still exponentially closer to St. Francis than they are to the front of the line in the NCAA, in the big boy world. I mean, that's the reality. So I guess, not that I don't agree with what you're saying, but I guess the better question would be, is where do you draw the line? And, how sustainable of a business plan is what Robert Morris is doing? And are they going to be – that arena is spectacular, by the way. I love that place. But are they going to be able to fill that up on a Tuesday night in January? That's what you have to ask yourself. I mean, Pitt, obviously when they're good, they'll sell out. But is Robert Morris ever going to get to a point where we would confuse Robert Morris with Gonzaga or Butler or insert, school here? Probably not. But, there's a lot of soul searching being done. Look at Cleveland State. They just dropped their wrestling program. More wrestling programs will be dropped, I promise. But there are really hard conversations being had right now. Where do you go? And unfortunately, and again, I know nothing. This is just speculation and a guy that's, kind of smart sometimes. But the only way that Robert Morris is going to go up is if it's addition by subtraction. The only way there's going to be more resources, because, again, I don't think Moon Township is going to be able to have a sustainable $1 million, gate every year plus, NIL. I just don't believe that to be true. because Pitt football can't do it. What would make things Robert Morris could? But the money has to come from somewhere. And under this new model that we seem to be falling into, the only way that model is sustainable is eliminating existing overhead, I think. And that is the really sad part about it.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that's really kind of important, and I would just say this, is that the model is shifting from everything else being money spent to focusing on how to pay your players. You know what I'm saying? That's the other thing that is a little bit it's a little bit I would say troubling, isn't it? That the focus is now almost on your payroll and nothing else.
Well, I saw an interesting headline, and I believe it was on 3. And it read, Andrew Luck decided to fire Troy Taylor at Stanford. Andrew Luck is Stanford's general manager of the football program. Did Andrew Luck really fire the football coach, or is that the AD's job to fire? I mean, so there's so many layers in this new world, and the reality is, the problematic part of it is that, in terms of the pool, in the big boy world, there's only room for maybe 50 or 60. And, how do you get there? I just don't know. I mean, even in the Power 5 or the Power 4, the Big Ten and the SEC, there are still the haves and the have-nots. And we saw it with the Magnificent Seven in the ACC, where they, started calling people out, Florida State, Clemson, like, hey, we are the earners here. What's going to happen when all of a sudden Penn State, Ohio State, Michigan get together and say, hey, why is Indiana and Illinois making the same money that we're making? We're the ones that make all that money. So, I mean, even in the groups of haves, there are still the haves and the have-nots. And as we're sort of jockeying on the proverbial totem pole, everybody's trying to get to the front of the line. What it boils down to, Paul, is there's only a handful of schools that can really offer a sustainable business plan to make any of this make sense. Penn State can rationalize a $15 million football roster. Why? Because they make 10 times that annually off the football program. Again, I'm not picking on Robert Morris. I don't know the financials. This is just educated speculation. Can the athletic department at Robert Morris justify adding another $1 million in payroll to a program that probably does not turn a profit already?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's, that's fair. But the problem is, when you look at the money that's being thrown around, I just don't know that Robert Morris has the ability to do that. But I don't know that a lot of schools do. And quite frankly, I'm concerned that schools even like Pitt in the future here could be struggling to really compete like the way that they need to compete, because the reality is, what they get from the ACC and what they're going to have to pay out, it doesn't leave a lot of room for other stuff. So, and I've heard a number of different things that, they're going to consider options like, maybe some sports on the chopping block. I think that's going to be probably what is going to be the most immediate reaction among a number of schools.
Well, hang on. Let's do a little history lesson.
It's chopping sports.
How was Title IX implemented?
What do you mean?
Well, how was Title IX addressed? How did schools become Title IX compliant?
Oh, by chopping sports. Yeah.
I mean, look at how many Division I programs the PSAC used to have in wrestling. What happened to them? Title IX. Right. That's where they all went.
Well, and men's swimming is another sport that sort of disappeared. I mean, there's a number of different places that you can look at and say, "Wow, boy, they've got a big problem." Just trying to do what it takes here to figure out how you cut payroll. I mean, you got to cut sports, you got to cut maybe administrative costs and things of the such. You've got to cut some jobs within the athletic department. Maybe you don't need 65, associate athletic directors. But a lot of schools are going to have to figure out how to make it all work. I don't know if that's a good thing.
I would agree. And, the thing is, the irony being is that, Robert Morris and St. Francis both have done what in recent years? They went from non-scholarship football to what? Scholarship football. Yeah. And now all of a sudden, St. Francis is going to become a Division III sport, athletic department. I just, when you look at, you can't compete in everything. Like, you just can't. And, I look at, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense that, Mercyhurst just went up. Everybody was sort of raising that, like, how sustainable is this? But
right.
While I see the intrigue, I also see the rationale behind St. Francis dropping, and I just can't imagine the conversations that are being had behind closed doors at the mid-level Power 5 schools, let alone in the Horizon League, the NEC, the MMAC. A lot of these pro leagues that maybe have one or two flagships, but the bottom rungs of the ladder that everybody is supported by, from the collective league, they have to be looking themselves in the mirror and say, this is insane.
Well, and I think this is the thing. Like, I think one of the things about, I've had a number of people have asked me, oh, well, how much money could they be saving? Blah, blah, blah. Why don't they just go to D2? D2, number one, to compete in D2, you got to give out scholarships because you're competing, you get scholarship programs.
Yep.
And there's a number of other things that really aren't going to give you that much relief financially because of that. You go to D3 now, you don't have to give out athletic scholarships. That's number one. Number two, you can focus on recruiting students to your school. And basically, it's amazing, Joe. I've got friends that coach in Division III, and you do too. And so, head count is a big thing now for all of these coaches. Why? Yep. Because the more guys you put on your team, the more kids you have that are paying tuition to come to the school, as opposed to we're paying for these kids to come to school. Now, guess what? I mean, obviously there's academic scholarships and financial aid and all that other stuff, but the reality is you've got kids that are probably going to pay something in tuition coming to your school. So, for instance, what has really started to crop up a little bit is the JV programs in college where, you have 24 people on your basketball team now. And so you got to figure out what to do with about 15 of them. So you have a JV program. And at the end of the day, that's really what is going on at St. Francis. Someone said, well, they might lose some enrollment. I said, but they're good. Well, say there's, I don't know, let's just say there's, if you count the football players, let's just say there's 200 scholarship athletes on St. Francis's campus. I don't know what the real number is, but let's just use that number, 200. Let's say that number drops to like 160. Guess what? All of the 160 are now paying things. Although I will say most schools that are making this transition, they'll honor the scholarships until you're done, even if they're getting rid of the program.
Well, I don't know about in Division I, but I know that this was a big issue in the PSAC, and it's looming again with the speculation of who's going to replace Mercyhurst. If you go to Clarion or Edinburgh or Slippery Rock or Cal or Indiana, there is actual physical money that exchanges hands from the athletic department to the school for your scholarship. The private schools, I had a very good friend of mine, used to be a Division II athletic director at a private school, and his famous line was, everybody thinks we have a lot of money. What we really have is a really big eraser because we can make your tuition go away. So I don't know how much money is actually exchanging hands in terms of what they would be saving. But to your larger point, if the number is, if you have 200 kids that aren't paying anything, but you're gaining 100 kids that are paying everything. I was just a comm major, but that does seem like an uptick in the resources.
Right. I think it's important now to say that, I don't think what St. Francis did is going to be uncommon.
No. No.
And I think that, one way you could maybe save it a little bit is create an FCS like there is in football. But I don't know that there's a lot of momentum for that because so many people are so in love with the NCAA tournament. But here's the thing I think that we're seeing this year and even last year. People act like this year, oh, it's all chalk, blah, blah, blah. Well, last year, the Elite Eight was seven Power Four teams and UConn, who essentially is a Power Four team. I mean, come on. That was the Elite Eight. It was trending this way last year. And I'll tell you, it's probably only going to get worse because one of the edges that the Robert Morrises and all these schools had in the past when they'd get to the NCAA tournament is they'd have juniors, seniors, and fifth-year guys who were in the program for 3 or 4 years or 5 years, and they'd be playing against teams, from power conferences that maybe have freshmen and sophomores playing. And, that age difference made a little bit more of an even playing court. And, the experience difference was able to, cause some of these upsets. Well, guess what? The third, fourth, and fifth-year players are increasingly going to be transferring up, which means the Robert Morrises of the world are probably going to be competing with either the second tier transfers or freshmen and sophomores. So I think what we're seeing in the NCAA tournament is not a fluke. I think it's going to become a trend.
You know what the funniest thing about, there's only so much money in the world, right? And if you make more of it, that's really because you've taken it from somebody else that somebody else has lost, right? You're climbing the ladder. There's only so much of the pie. But it was hilarious where everybody was celebrating Drake and Ben McCollum. How awesome was it that Ben McCollum took, these kids from Northwest Missouri State, and now here they are in the NCAA tournament. But you know what nobody but me said? Kind of feel bad for Northwest Missouri State. I think they were 6-22 this year because Ben McCollum took everybody with him to Drake. Like these feel-good stories are taking away from somebody else. And, while it's awesome, that Nate Sestina from Cameron County, Bucknell, got to go to Kentucky and get to the front of the line, but I bet you Bucknell wishes he would have stuck around for his last year. He's a grad transfer. He's done. Well, yes, but they redshirted him and they paid his freight and they trained him. And not that there's any loyalty to be expected. I know that, if you work for Dairy Queen and Burger King offers you double your salary, I get that. Right. But that we need to kind of take this, and look from the 10,000-foot lens here that, everybody wants to blame these coaches, but really for the most part, and I've said this forever with Kentucky and John Calipari, those kids were using Calipari in Kentucky just as much as Calipari and Kentucky were using those kids.
Right, of course. But I think, again, we just have to really go look through and figure this out. This is not going to go away. And so it's the model that people are going to do one of two things. They'll continue to sort of bitch and moan and complain about it, or they can basically now say, okay, well, this is the new world that we live in, and it is what it is. And that's where we go from there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not, Penn State is one of the few teams that I really, really care about. I've been a lifelong fan, and it's sort of a dream come true because Mike Rhodes was one of my heroes growing up, that he's now the head coach. But, they lost Hudson Ward. They lost Javon Carter. So, I mean, there's 2 4-stars at Penn State. They're now hitting the portal. But, you touched on this with the Diaz brothers. There's a 50% possibility that Mike Rhodes asked Ward and Carter to get to Steppen because, that's not quite what we thought. So, and I do think that while Will Wade was sort of villainized, I think the transparency and, the quite frank bluntness of Will Wade talking about how the fact that the kids at McNeese State are also of benefit to his sort of meteoric rise, because a lot of them are either going to get to go with him or go on somewhere else. Florida Atlantic, who went to the Final Four a couple of years ago, they have a kid at Florida, Michigan, and Auburn. But 3 of those kids have gone on from Florida Atlantic to get paid to play, and they're, here they are back again with a chance to get to the Final Four again.
Well, what's hilarious is, I don't know if you saw, someone tweeted out the Sweet 16 starting 5 based on, starting 5 and where they all came from, where they all started on each starting 5, and basically said, guess the team. Duke had 4 of their 5 were actually Duke guys. Purdue had 5 of 5. And I think Michigan State had 3 of 5. Everybody else, you had no idea who they were because they had 5 guys from 5 different schools. That's really the reality, And
again, I don't think that, we can get to the place where I'm not willing to give up. I'm just going to have to come to terms with it. And, while I will be a Penn State fan, I can't fall in love with the player because there's a high probability that, he's going to leave. And, obviously, I'm very involved with Edinburgh Wrestling, and, they are monitoring the portal, getting kids on the rebound. But, then they're also very concerned with any of their young guys that have success that are going to be leaving. Look at David Taylor in Oklahoma State. Hamady and Hendrickson are one and done transfers. They got paid. They left Wisconsin and Air Force respectively, and they got a championship out of the deal. So it is a modern era where you will be much further ahead to just enjoy your team, appreciate the brand, but don't fall in love with the team because you're not going to have it 2 years in a row.
No, for sure. Absolutely. Well, Joe, I appreciate you jumping on. As always, it's always a fun time. Hopefully, like I said, the doom and gloom that we seem to see where this whole thing is going, hopefully it doesn't happen. But you know what? I'm just really not all that optimistic.
Well, look at it this way. If you need your glass to be half full, Paul, you can be excited twice a year. You can be excited for the recruiting season and then just assume that your team is going to get better players out of the transfer portal. They're not just going to lose all the good ones to the transfer portal.
Well, that's always good to know. Thank you, Joe. We'll do it again.
All right, buddy. Be good. Thank you.
All right. That's Joe Lednowski. Again, life is really, really hard right now for small schools and for Division I schools that are trying really hard to survive. Hopefully tomorrow we'll be able to talk more about a number of different happier subjects. Today was kind of a bummer. Tomorrow will be a better day, and then we'll be getting you ready for the Pirates opener. Till such time we meet again, enjoy your day.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.